Hi and welcome back to the channel. As always, you can find me over on Instagram at the House of Langford as well as at Overall Sews, and I have knitting and stitching projects in my Ravelry page over at Mad X Stitcher. Now today we're going to make some Easter decorations. So what would Easter be without some Easter eggs? So this one's got some buttons on, and we've got some felt shapes on the back as well. So you get to learn different stitching techniques as well as how to sew on a button. It's a life skill right there. We've also got some really cute versions of this. So we've got some different types of shapes on the back of this one and a really cute bunny. That's what you're all here for really, isn't it? We've even got our own little Mr. Bunny, and he's got a carrot to munch on as well. So let's get started, shall we? Okay, so for today's tutorial you're going to need some templates of the shapes you want to work on. So I've got an egg, a bunny rabbit, some chicks, and I've just got those from Google just as an outline, and then you print them out, or you could just draw around something you've already got or draw your own shapes. You're then going to need some threads. So I've just got some embroidery threads in different colours. I've got some needles, depending on what stitch I want to work on, or if I find it difficult to get it through the fabric. I've got some buttons, and you might even have some of these little gems lying around. These are from Beadcraft. The buttons are just from, you can either get from Poundland or the Works, or I think even the Range as well. You're going to need some things to draw around, so I've just got a glue stick, a lip balm, some queens. You're going to need some felt. This is funky felt from Craft Planet. It is Do Craft, so you can find that in most craft stores. I've then got some waddings, so some toy stuffing, which is nice and fluffy. And I've got some pins. And you are also going to need some ribbon. Now, it doesn't have to be Easter ribbon. It could be any ribbon at all. It doesn't need to be too wide. This width is pretty much what we're going to be working with today anyway. But yeah, something fun to work with, and that's going to be our hanging loops. Or if you're making the bunny rabbit, then you can make some little bows for him. Now, a good pair of scissors will not go amiss in this situation. We're going to need to be cutting out our fabric and our threads, as well as our paper templates. And I would also recommend having a pen to hand so we can draw around shapes in order to cut out some shapes in our felt. So the first thing you are going to need is some templates or something to draw around. I've just printed off, I've got an egg shape, I've got a couple of little chickens, little chicks, and then what I've also got is some bunny rabbits. It's got a few different bunny rabbits. Now today I'm going to show you what I've used for this bunny rabbit, and we are going to do an egg shape as well, and then I'm going to show you a couple of other pieces that I've managed to do using these techniques. So the first thing you need to do is print this off or draw around something, and then you're going to need to cut it out. Now you can use paper scissors or paper, obviously. Once you've got it cut out, I've just put a couple of pins onto a piece of felt, and then I'm going to cut around that shape. Now you can use paper scissors for this, you don't need to use any fabric scissors. Felt is quite a fibrous fabric, so it's really easy to cut through, and if you've got any of those crazy kid scissors, so like zigzags or scallops and scallops or however you want to pronounce it, they'll give you a nice different edge as well, so you can get some really fun shapes going on. Okay, so if you don't have any pins, that's absolutely fine. You could just put your shape onto a piece of fabric, onto a piece of felt, and just draw around it, and then cut that out instead, and then it will give you the exact same shape. So that is our egg shape. Okay, the first thing I'm going to show you is how to use buttons. So for this one, I've just grabbed a random bag of buttons from the shop, If you've got any buttons lying around at home, then that's perfect for this. And then all I've done is started to sew them on. So we're going to thread up a needle and we are going to get started. Okay, so I have cut myself a length of thread. Now these are made up of 6 strands of thread. We're only going to need 1. So what I like to do is just separate the threads at the end, find 1 strand, hold on to both, and then run my finger between the 2, and that tends to separate them quite nicely. There you go. So what you're going to do is thread one end through your needle, so place the thread between your finger and thumb, eye of the needle on top, and then roll down, and that should pick it up. You're then going to fold, so you're going to put both ends together, and what this is going to do is stop us from losing our needle and give us something to secure to the back of our fabric. So we're going to put both ends together, and then I'm going to tie a knot. So I'm tying both ends of the thread together, and I'm going to do 2 knots to make sure it's a nice secure one, so it's not going to pull through our fabric. There we go. And then my needle is on the other end and it's not going to come off. Okay, so all I've done for this one is just placed some buttons on my egg shape. They're all different colours, they're all different shapes, sizes, and then if you've got, for example, a bag of gems like these ones, you could also use those and create something like this, which is nice and sparkly. So I'm going to sew on this little peachy one. I've got 2 left on here to sew on. So I'm just going to hold it in place. I'm going to push my needle up through the back of my fabric, and then that knot is going to stop the thread from coming out. And I'm going to go through one of the eyes of the button and let that fall into place. Okay, and I'm going to put the needle through the other hole and pull it through to the wrong side of my fabric. And then you can just tidy up your threads so they sit nice and nicely together. I'm just going to do that a couple more times. So coming up through the back, through the hole in the button. You might get a little resistance. Sometimes the threads like to knot up. If you get a little loop like this, find the loop with your needle and just pull, and it will unthread. So once we've got the first button stitched on, all we're going to do is bring our needle back up where we want the next button to go, bring it back up through your fabric, find your button, and again go through the back of one of the eyes of your buttonhole. Again, let it drop to your fabric, go down through one of the holes. See, you can see this one's got 4 holes, the previous one had 2. So I've just done 3 ups and downs through that one. This one I'm going to do a big cross through all 4 holes, and then I'm going to repeat, so I'm going to do it twice. This is my first cross. And there's my second cross. So that is all of my buttons sewn onto that piece of my egg. Then we're going to flip it over and tie off our thread. So I like to make a loop, go through the stitches on the back, and then place my needle through the loop and pull. That creates a little knot. So let's do it again. Make a loop. You can use your thumb or your finger to go round. press the needle through the back of your stitches and make sure the needle comes up through that loop. And then pull. Okay, and then we can just pass the needle back through the back of the fabric, and that way it's hidden behind the button, and we can just snip that off. Like so. That is one piece finished. Okay, these ones are sewn on in the exact same way. You can see you've got a whole top and bottom of each stone. So I've just done a couple of passes either side just to anchor them in place so they're not going to move around. And with those you can play with lots of different shapes and patterns, so that's quite pretty. So working up in buttons is fairly simple if you've got some buttons. You might not have any buttons though, and that's okay. If you've got lots of felt, you can see I've got lots of different colours. You could simply cut some shapes out of those. Now they could be any shape at all. I've got some circles, some triangles, some stripes on there, and this one's got some stripes on as well. So there's lots of different patterns you can play with, and if you don't have any, if you're not confident in your sewing, then that's absolutely fine. You could stick these on with PVA glue and they would soon stick to the felt. So there are lots of different ways that you could draw shapes. I'm just going to go with circles today just because I find them quite satisfying and they'll match my buttons. So I'm going to have this as one half of my egg and this as the other half of my egg. Now you can see I've also poked my needle through this one just to keep it safe so I'm not going to lose it, and it also is not going to get not going to stab me in anything. So you could use coins. Let's move that one out of the way. You could use coins, you could use buttons. I've got a lip balm tin, I've even got a glue stick. All of these could be used to trace around and draw your shapes. So let's have a go. So first one I'm going to do is some of this really nice light blue. So I'm just going to pop on a coin and I'm just going to draw around it just with an ordinary pen. That gives me a nice shape. I've got another coin here. Let's try some buttons. Is that any different? So I've just gone for lots of different shapes. Okay, so I'm going to do one more. So I've got 4 different sized circles there to cut out, and then I'm going to do some in another colour as well, and I think we're going to go for some purple. So I'm going to use the glue stick this time, and again I'm just going to draw around it. Now because it's a darker colour I'm going to need to draw it a little bit harder so that I can see the lines that I'm drawing. Okay, not perfect, but that's okay, we're going to cut it out anyway. I think this one might be a little bit too big, but just for demonstration purposes let's draw around this one as well. So we've got a couple of circles in the purple and we've got some circles in the blue. Now we just need to cut them out, and again you can just use your paper scissors to cut them out of there. Right, so I have cut out all of my little circles. Now you can see we still got the outlines of our pen and we don't want those to show on our egg shape. So what we're going to do is just flip them all over, and then we can't see any of the pen marks. Now I've also cut out a couple of little yellow ones as well, because even though this one's quite big, I thought maybe I could layer it up and put a yellow dot on top. So you can play around with the layers in your work. So we have one egg. Let's have a look and see where we can put all of these shapes on. So I'm just playing with what I've got. in terms of placement. It might be that I don't use all of them, and that's absolutely fine. That one is rather big though. Well, that works. Okay, so I can play around with the shapes. Don't have to have all of them. I could just put I could take that one off. I could just put all the blue ones on. Okay, so it's just a case of playing around and seeing what you got. There we go. I think we'll go with that. Okay, so once you're happy, you could pin these in place. If you haven't got any pins, that's absolutely fine. You can have someone help you hold them in place, or just to hold on to them whilst you're stitching. Again, you could use just a dab of PVA glue just to hold them down for you. And of course, you wouldn't necessarily need to sew them, but just be aware that it's not necessarily permanent, so you might find that later on they'll start to peel off, so this is why I like to sew everything in place. So we're just going to pop some pins on there, and then I'm going to show you what stitch we're going to use to stitch them in place. So again, we're just going to take one piece of thread. We're going to thread one end onto our needle, fold it in half, so end to end, and then we are going to tie a knot at the bottom, just as we did for our buttons. That one didn't sit right, there we go. That's better. Okay, so my needle's not going to come off, and it's nice and secure. So this time we are going to do a running stitch, which just means coming up and down through the fabric repeatedly around our shape. So we're going to start at the very top. Again, needle is behind my fabric, and I'm going to come up through both layers of felt. Then all I'm going to do is go straight back down through the fabric a little way across, so I've got a little line, and pull my needle all the way through, so I've got this little stitch. I'm going to repeat, come across, leave a gap, come up through the fabric and back down through the fabric, making sure that my needle's not hitting that loop, so I'm not getting tangled up. Now what you might want to make sure is that you are going up and down through the fabric and not going around your fabric. So if you come up, you don't want to then go around to go back up through again. You want to make sure you're going up and then down, and that is called running stitch. Now there are lots of different stitches you could do. You could play around with some embroidery stitches. This is just one of the easiest ones I found, as I show you on this one. So all of my little shapes are just done with running stitch. You don't have to do it all in the same colour. You could do it in different colours. I've just done all of these ones in yellow, and I'm going to do all of these ones in white. Now you can get lots of different coloured threads. They don't need to be single colour. You could even get something like this, which is a variegated thread, so it's lots of different colours. You've got red, blue and green in there, and that gives you a really nice effect. I'll show you that one later. Okay, so we are going to continue with this one, again up and down through the blue. See if I can get that closer for you to have a look at. So up and back down. You want to try and keep your stitches nice and small, and then that will give you the most security in terms of keeping it on your fabric. So you can see I've come all the way around to the beginning. I can then take that pin out, and then my shape is secure. Again, flip it over, and you're going to end it the same way you did before. So I'm going to make a loop, thread my needle underneath the stitch, and make sure that needle comes back up through the loop. So again, make a loop, needle goes under the thread, needle comes up, and that creates a knot. Now because we've got that shape underneath, I can just thread my needle through the back and trim that off. And that is one shape complete. So once you've got one, it's just a case of going around and stitching all of the others in place. If you've got these layered up, you want to make sure you've got enough space so that you can get all the way around one and then all the way around the other one. Now you could sew them together individually and then sew them on. So you're just sewing, I would then sew the yellow to the purple and then the purple to the pink. So I'm not trying to go through 3 layers. Or you could simply just stitch through the yellow one through all 3 layers and leave the purple one a little bit loose. Again, it's a different texture and it's your own pattern. So it doesn't really matter what you are doing as long as they are all secure. So what we could do is I'm going to show you how to do this cross stitch on the purple one. So again, I've threaded a new needle. I'm going to come up through the back. I've got a knot at the back to hold it in place. Now I'm just going to do a crosses all the way around this felt purple piece, and that will give us a different look to the first one. So rather than coming straight across, this time I'm going to go at an angle. Again, you're still going up and down through the fabric, you're not going around the fabric. Just be careful you don't get your thread caught on pins. And that is half of our cross. We can then come straight back down or come up next to it above the first stitch, and then we're going to go across diagonally, just making a cross. Okay, let's show you again. Coming up through the back of my fabric, I'm going to go at a diagonal line to create half of my cross. Untangle my thread. I'm going to come out next to it and then cross over in the other direction, so another diagonal line, which creates a cross. And then I'm just going to go all the way around back up to the start. Okay, so I've now gone all the way around with those crosses and I've still got some thread left over, so I'm now going to do a running stitch around the yellow in the middle, and that would just hold that in place as well. Now you could use any stitch for your shapes, it doesn't need to be running stitch. Just remember that the more complicated your stitch, the longer it will take. So if you want to make these nice and quick, you could just do a very big cross inside your shape. It doesn't need to be lots of little crosses, it could just be one big one. And again, that would still secure your work. Or like I said, you could use some PVA glue and that would hold it together as well. So I'm just doing this really quickly. Just going all the way around so that we can end off this thread and get the rest of them sewn on. So then you would just continue sewing on all of your shapes until you are happy with them, and again ending your thread same as before. Thread through underneath with your loop, and that will end off, and then we can just run the needle back through our fabric. Okay, again we can just take that pin out now that we've secured that one. Okay, and then just continue till you've got all the others in place, and we'll have half of our egg finished. Now this is going to go with this one, so once I've stitched all these on, we'll have one egg ready to sew up. Once you've got a front and a back, you are ready to sew the two together. Now this is where you're going to need a piece of ribbon. So I've just got some Happy Easter ribbon. I think you can get these in the pound shop, same as the buttons. I think that's just from the pound shop as well. It's quite a nice big assorted bag, and then you can't really find pairs in there, but for this that doesn't really matter. So I'm just going to take one length of ribbon and fold it in half, like so. I'm then going to pin it to one of my pieces. I'm going to pin it this way so that it holds it in place, like so. And then we're going to put this one on the other side. Again, I'm just lining up all the edges like so. Now we're going to stuff these with some toy stuffing. Now you can get that in all different places. Aldi had some at one point. You can get them from Hobbycraft, you can get it from eBay. It's just a simple bag of toy stuffing. So what I've done, I've just pinned that ribbon on top like so. I'm then going to put some pins all the way around in the same way I've done the top one, just pinning either towards the middle or towards the outside, just to hold everything together. And just be wary that if you've stitched your shapes to the edges like I have on these ones, they will need to be caught up in the edges of your egg shape as well, or any of the other shapes you're doing. This makes sure that you've got no bits flapping around and everything is nice and tidy. So I'm just going to go all the way around with some pins, and I'm going to start sewing at the very top. There we go. So just be careful with these because they are a little bit sharp. So what I've done is threaded up a length of the variegated thread. So I'm all ready to sew. Now I like to make sure that the ends of my thread with the knot get hidden inside. So the first thing we're going to do is just poke it open just a little bit. Now I'm going to go through the ribbon and through the felt. Pull my thread right till I've got the knot in there. There we go. And I'm going to tuck it inside my shape. There we go. Now what I like to do is do a couple of stitches across the very top. So going from left to right, just over the top of that pin in the very top, holding it together. So I get a horizontal stitch. Now I do this a couple of times just to make sure that that ribbon is secure, and then I can take that top pin out ready to move on. There we go. Now I come back out through the front because that is the side that I'm going to need to see my stitches on. So let's take that first pin out. Now you could stitch around in the running stitch that you've just been doing for your shapes on here, but you need to make sure you keep your stitches nice and close together, otherwise you're going to have big gaps and your stuffing is going to try and escape. What I'm going to do is actually called a blanket stitch. Now this requires a long length of thread because we've got to try and go all the way around in one go. It doesn't matter if you don't get all the way around in one go. There are ways of joining a new piece of thread and still continuing in the same way. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a loop with my thread. Now I can hold that with my left hand. My needle is going in through the front of my fabric again. Now it's a little bit different when we're at the top, because I want to make sure that it looks nice and tidy. So what I like to do is come through the ribbon so that my needle is in the middle of that loop, and that gives me my first stitch. Now don't worry about it looking like a triangle to start with. We're going to pick that end up when we come back. So to continue round, hold the thread in your left hand to make a loop. You're going to push the needle through both layers of the felt and then push that needle up through the loop. So you can see the thread's going behind that needle, and then pull. Now it's called blanket stitch because it creates a really nice edge So I've got thread on the very edge of my fabric. So I'm going to do some more. Again, through both layers of fabric, make sure the needle comes up and in front of your thread. Give it a nice pull, and then you can flatten it all out afterwards. And the idea is that you are trapping that thread at the very edge and creating this line of stitching around the edge. So make a loop. The needle goes through both layers of fabric and back up in front of your thread. Make a loop. Now what you want to do is just make sure that your needle goes through the front of your fabric each time, and that will keep it nice and tidy. Now you can see that they're not very far apart. In terms of my stitches, they're only about 5mm, maybe up to 1 centimetre apart. And that is going to keep it nice and sturdy. So we're just going to go almost all the way around. We're going to get to about here on the other side. So we're going to go all the way around and stop about here. And then that gives us space to put some stuffing in, and then we can stitch up the hole. So let's do a few more. Just working around the pins. And hitting my camera. Okay, so I'm going to let you get on with that, and I'm going to come back to you when we get to here. Right, so I'm nearly at a point where we need to stop, and you can see I'm running out of thread. So I'm just going to do one more stitch, and I'm going to show you how to end this one. It's very similar to how we've been doing the others anyway. So I'm going to turn it to its side, and I am going to use the loop we've already got. So we've got thread hanging over to the side. There we go, thread hanging to the side to make a little loop. We're going to go underneath that stitch we've just made, just trying to catch just the thread, and again the needle comes up in front of that thread, and then we're going to pull, and we're going to do that a couple more times, or at least twice, like so, and then we can unthread our needle and push that thread inside. So this is where we're going to need to take all of our pins out now that we've sewn all the way around. There we go, tuck that inside, take the pins out, and then we can get some stuffing. So we've gone almost all the way around. We've got this gap here at the top so we can stuff it. Let's grab just a handful of stuffing. Now you can put it in little bits. It doesn't need to be all in one go, and we're just going to push that into that hole. Get it right to the bottom. So I'm just using my thumb to press it all the way around to the bottom, and then just fill it up until we've got a nice soft 3D egg shape. Okay, so let's put a little bit more in because it's not quite got enough at the top. Like so. Now it's difficult to just sew that together, so what we're going to need to do is pop a pin in there just to hold it in place whilst we are going to continue sewing it up. Now this is where you need to make sure that you are going back to the front of your work. So this is currently the back, and that is the front that I've been working from with all my blanket stitch around the outside edge. So we're going to thread up our needle again with some more thread. Again, put a knot at the end of your length. Okay, what I want to do is come out in the bottom of this stitch. So that last stitch we made in our blanket stitch. So I'm going to go from the inside. Okay, so I'm not going through this side of my pink, I'm going on the inside and coming out through that stitch. Okay, this way my knot is going to be hidden inside, and we're going to be able to continue our stitch without it looking out of place. So we're just going to tuck all of the ends inside, and then we're going to come back up through underneath that top loop there, and that will allow us to continue. So again, make a loop, let's bring it closer, make a loop, going through both layers of fabric and bring your needle up in front of your thread, and then pull tight. And then what that will do is hopefully hide the other thread as well. And then you're just going to continue until you get to the top. So let's do that. Nice and tight. Oh, be careful you don't catch your ribbon, or if you've got any buttons, try not to loop it around your buttons. This is where I make a really big mess and get caught up. There we go. Okay, now if you get to a point where you can take that pin out, it's a lot easier to work around your work that way without it in the way. So just continuing with that blanket stitch all the way up to the top, and then I'll show you how we end it so it looks like it is one continuous stitch. Right, so I'm back at the beginning. Okay, so that triangle that we started with, we're just going to go underneath that stitch with our needle and push through to the back, and then it looks like our blanket stitch has been going all the way around. And then because we've got that starter at the back, we can just use that to tie a couple of stitches, tie off our thread, and then thread it back. I like to just push the needle into my egg and bring it out somewhere about an inch away, pull all the way through, and then just trim off that thread. And that is one egg complete. So you've practiced running stitch, cross stitches, and blanket stitch around the outside. You've also, if you've done the buttons, is learned how to sew on a button. Pretty cute, right? So all of those stitches that you've just learned doing the egg shape can be transferred to the bunny rabbit shape. So for this one, all I've done is cut 2 circles and stitch them together using the running stitch. So I've stitched the white into the base of my bunny rabbit first, and then stitched the blue on top. For his little tail, I've just done 2 big crosses over the top of each other to make a little star, and then he's just stitched all the way around and stuffed. And then the ribbon isn't stitched on, it's just a piece of ribbon wrapped around and tied into a little bow. So they use the exact same techniques. Try this one. Now I think you're all actually here because you like the little bunny. So he uses running stitch to stitch the ears onto the bunny himself. What I did was make the bunny up first and then blanket stitch him onto the backing fabric for my egg. So you can see he's got a blanket stitch all the way around, and that just gives him a nice edge. But I stitched the pink on first with running stitch and his nose, and I did all of the details on his face as well. Now I'm going to show you how to make up the bunny rabbit, because the stitches I used for his eyes are called a lazy daisy, and they can also be used to do a carrot. And that gives you a different look to either a running stitch or a back stitch. Now I'm going to show you the back stitch as well, because that's what I used for his mouth. So let's make a cute little bunny. Okay, so for the main bunny shape, I've tried to go for this kind of shape, but this one was actually a bit too big to go on my egg. So I've cut it a little bit smaller. Now all I've done is folded a piece of felt in half, as you can see here, and then just cut my outline out so that when I've opened it up, I've then got a bunny shape cut out and ready to go. What I've then done is just cut out 2 little pieces of pink for his ears, and then a little tiny triangle for his nose. Like I said earlier, these are just stitched on with running stitch, so I'm just going to go around the inside edge of each of the pink pieces so that I can take out my pins, and then I'm going to show you how to put the features in for his face. Okay, so now I've got my accents in the pink sewn onto my little rabbit. We're going to do his little mouth, his whiskers, and his eyes as well. So we're going to start just below his nose, this little triangle piece. Again, I've got a long thread, this time in black, and I've put a knot at the end of my thread. We're going to go straight down for the center bridge of his little cheeks. We're going to go to a diagonal. So this is how you would do a running stitch, but we're not going to keep going because we want to join these two up. So we're just going to go back, put our needle back in at the bottom of that first stitch, like so. We're then going to come along from the second stitch we did, and again come back to the second one. So it's called back stitch, and I've got a little loop. So again, if you get a little loop like this, pop your needle in the loop, pull upright so that the knot goes towards your needle, and then it will slip right off. Okay, so that's the base of his cheek. Got one more stitch on this. We're going to curve back up again. So each time I'm putting my needle to the very end, so forward of my stitch, and then I'm coming back to the previous one. So that is one half of our bunny face. Now we're going to thread our needle back through. So I'm just weaving it underneath the stitches at the back. And again, we are going to do the other side of his face. So again, we're going to come down. So we're going forward. Make sure that our thread isn't getting too tight to the back, and then we're going to go straight back to the center again. That's a little bit off, so I'm actually going to unthread my needle and redo that stitch because I'm not happy with it. So you can see I'm just using my needle to lift my stitches. Now if you did the loop method at the very beginning, you would need to cut your thread off. When I sew, I like to just have 2 stitches, 2 threads, and then I just keep a little bit of a tail of thread, and I always hold where the eye of the needle is. So let's try that one again. I think I'm just too far out. That's a bit better. And again, back to the center of his mouth. And we keep getting little knots and loops in our thread, so we're just going to keep undoing them. There we go, that's a bit better. Okay, we're then going to come straight back out. So we're going to the left this time. And then we're going to come up again at the end. And that is the little cheeks of our rabbit. If I can undo the knot, there we go. That's the cheeks of our rabbit. Okay, so now we need to do his whiskers. Now all I've done on this one is put 3 whiskers either side, and they're just one very long stitch, so a bit longer than the back stitch or the running stitch we've been doing. So find a spot where you want the start of your whisker, bring all of your thread out. Maybe your thread's not as knotty as my one. There we go. That sounds good to moustache. Right, so I'm just going to come out to the side. I want one to go just below his cheek, like so. Now I could come back to the middle again. Don't pull too tight because it will crease up your fabric. I'm going a bit longer this time. I'm going almost straight to the side. One more. So he's got 3 little whiskers. Okay, we can thread out, needle back, through and across. And then we can do the same on the other side. So let's go to the bottom one first. It's a bit far out this time, down here. Like so, that's one. That's 2. And this one's a little bit smaller, making 3. So he's got his little ears, his nose and his mouth with his whiskers as well. So we're going to go straight to the middle this time, just to the right above his nose. And now we're going to do a lazy daisy stitch. Now a lazy daisy is similar to the blanket stitch. It's also similar to a running stitch. You're going to need to make a loop first, like so. Your needle goes in just next to where you came out, and then it comes back up through your fabric in front of your thread. Pull your thread until it loops around, like so. You're then going to put your needle above the loop. So I'm not catching the loop, going above it, just a very small stitch. And that holds on to your loop. Then we can come back to the bottom again, so just above the nose. Make another loop, go in next to it, make sure the needle comes out roughly where you did in terms of the same height to make your eyes the same size. Pull slowly till you get a loop, and again go in above the eye, above that loop to secure. And we've got some big eyes on our bunny rabbit. And that's him finished. Now if you pulled them a little bit tighter like I did for the first one, you end up with eyes like this, or you can have wide eyes like these. Okay, next up is just getting this one stitched onto our egg shape with the blanket stitch around the outside. So we're going to do that one next. But before we do that, I'm going to do a few more of the lazy daisy stitch onto some orange fabric so that you can see how to do it in terms of lines, so that we can make a carrot as well. Okay, so I've got a piece of orange that's kind of cut into a triangle shape to make it look like a carrot. And I've got a length of thread, again with a knot at one end. And I'm going to show you how to do some lazy daisy stitches in rows this time. So we are going to come up through our fabric, make sure that knot keeps it secure at the back. We're going to make a loop. The needle is going to go in next to that stitch. Needle comes up through your fabric and in front of your thread, and you can pull. Now before, to do the eyes, we just went in straight above, but in order to do our just a straight line, we're actually going to keep going. So we're going to make another loop. Needle goes inside the previous loop as we did before. Needle comes up through the fabric in front of your thread and pull. Make a loop. Needle goes back in where the thread's coming out from. needle comes up through the fabric in front of your thread. So we'll do one more on this one. So I've gone in where the thread came out, needle comes up through your fabric, and that creates a line. And then to end it, you end it the same way as the first one we did for the eyes. Again, you go in above your loop, and that locks the stitches. And then all I've done is do them in variant different lengths, all the way down to the bottom, and the same on the other side, just to form the ridges on the carrot. And then it's just sewn together around the outside with a blanket stitch again, and I've just cut out a grass type leafy bit of green fabric felt at the top, just to look like it is being plucked out of the ground. So he's all pinned onto another egg shape. Now you could use the running stitch just to go all the way around the outside like we did with all our shapes previously, but this time I'm going to do it in blanket stitch because I think it's a little bit neater, and then get this bunny stitched to his egg. Now it is a little bit different in terms of getting started because you haven't got to go around any edges like we do for the edge of the egg shapes or any of the other shapes. So I like to start on the inside, the left ear of his. Again, needle comes up through the back, and a knot at the back to keep it in place. Make a loop, needle goes through both layers of fabric, and this takes a little bit longer because it's not always possible to bring the needle straight back up. So I then come with my needle back up, but on the outside of my bunny shape, just grazing the edge of him, and it is up in front of my loop of thread to create my stitch. So again, make a loop, needle goes through your fabric. You can do it this way, but it's very difficult to try and get close to your shape. Needle comes up in front of your thread, and you create a loop, and you just continue all the way around with your blanket stitch. Okay, now you would just keep going all the way around, and then afterwards you could add a little bow here, you could put a little button in his ear, you could just decorate them however you like, and you just sew the edges up the same way we did before. So I always like to use the blanket stitch just because it gives me that nicer edge just on the outside. Okay, and then you can see how the stitch will look when it's all finished all the way around, and then just take the pins out when you are done. Okay, so now you can see that the bunny is all stitched on with that blanket stitch. It gives a nice neat edge around his shape, and he is ready to be stitched to the back of his egg, like so, the same way that we did the first one, all the way around the outside. Now if you're finding the blanket stitch a little bit difficult to go around the outside edges of your shapes, you can just do a whip stitch. Now again, I've threaded up my needle, so I'm just going to go into the back piece and leave that little tail so we can tuck it inside. Now what that means is just stitching over the edge of your fabrics. So you're not having to make a loop, you're not having to stitch through the loop, you're just stitching over your fabric. So you bring the thread to the front, or just leave it to the side. If you leave the thread down, it's a little bit easier. So you're just going to stitch into both layers of fabric and pull your needle through. And you see the thread goes around the outside, and you're just going to keep doing that through the front of your fabric, through both layers, and pull, just tidying them up. Okay, and that is another way of just finishing off your shapes and just stitching them together. Okay, needle through the front, through both layers of fabric, and pull your thread through. And every single one of these has got stuck in some way. So let's turn the angle. There we go. Through the front and pull your thread through the front and pull your thread. So you're not having to make sure that you're going through a loop. You're literally just putting the needle through the front of your fabric. And I've gone and split the thread. There we go. Through the front of your fabric and pulling it through. So it just goes over the edge of your shape. And this is a little bit quicker as well. All you have to do is just make sure you're not stitching through your threads as you're bringing your needle through to the back. Okay, and then as always you just end it the exact same way that we've done for all of our other stitches. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you've managed to make some really cute Easter decorations, whether it is a cute little bunny on an egg with his little cute features with his whiskers, or some felt shapes on the back. Maybe you've done the circles with the different stitches and stitched on some buttons, or maybe you've tried to do something a little bit different and make a bunny rabbit with a little bow, or a carrot for him to munch on. So please feel free to share what you've made from this tutorial. I'd love to see your makes, and have a very happy Easter.